Hi, I'm Terry Colette. I'm here today with Professor Adrienne Kerr, and we've reached the end of the 5-session series on the history of England, and we're talking about session 5. We've made it, Adrienne.
Thank you, Terry. We have. So we finished off the last session with the colonies having been lost. What does England do next? Well, of course, with the largest navy in the world by far, it has spread its maritime trading interest all the way through to Africa, the Caribbean, sugar, and then further east, the Middle East, and then impinging on India, where the issue over France and Portugal and Holland before it meant that there was a free-for-all, and England eventually became the dominant player in India. Then it moved on to further east and settled up colonies in Malaya, which was going to be important for tin and rubber in due course, and then went on to Singapore, trading state, with a view to going into China, which led to the infamous Opium Wars in the 19th century. So you can see that the story of the last part here is England post the colonies had a lot of opportunities, and India became the biggest financial contribution to England. It became about a quarter of the wealth of England came from India at one point, and so that's why England hung on to it until 1947. But further south, the great navigators like Cook were exploring this huge Pacific Ocean, which people knew very little about. And so he circumnavigated the world, and although previously Australia and New Zealand had been landed on by various people, the Dutch and the Portuguese, he established contact with New Zealand, and of course at this time Australia was beginning to grow in terms of its colony. And so England eventually took over New Zealand, and of course Australia grew, and that became part of the empire. Meanwhile, the war with China over the opium, because England was supplying opium into China, meant that England, as a reward for winning the first war against China, was given a scruffy piece of land called Hong Kong. And this was a marvelous opportunity, because during Victoria's time, her consort said, "We've won a war and all we get is a scruffy little island." What he didn't realize was that it was the best natural harbor in the East, and it is today. Hong Kong is a wonderful harbor, and it became an entrepot trading activity even at the present time. And we'll just touch on what's going on now. Of course, Hong Kong Island is very small, and eventually the second war with China meant that England got even more territory, Kowloon and the new territory, so it became quite a substantial piece of land. But when the new territories were bought from China, it was agreed that it was going to be on a 100-year lease. And so that 100 years is now up, and then that land had to be handed back. But the island of Hong Kong was ceded to England in perpetuity. But it's such a small island that England knew that if China wanted it, they could just take it overnight. So rather than get into a protracted, silly war which they'd lose, England handed it over to China, handed it back to China, if you like, and so Hong Kong became part of China. But the agreement that the English negotiated with China was that they would have one country but two systems, so that Hong Kong would be treated specially. Yes, the foreign affairs would be handled by China, but international trade would continue along British lines. They would have an element of democracy, they would be taught in English, and so on. The English financial system would continue. And in the embryonic move of China out of the Dark Ages into entrepreneurial capitalism, this is really important. Hong Kong was really important. At one time, it was something like 20% of the wealth was created from Hong Kong, and it's important that China behaved itself. Nowadays, there are many Hong Kongs in China, have all grown up, and China now has a much stronger hand with Hong Kong, and as you can see, it's exerting more and more pressure from Beijing, and that's beginning to squeak, in that the people of Hong Kong have been lucky in having this element of democracy, and they don't want to give it up. So watch this space. Wow. The First World War comes along, and this is the period of the end of empires. So in those days, great armies and navies could exert authority throughout the world. America was just becoming the world's greatest power. Around about 1900 to 1910, it eclipsed all the other major powers. So it became wealthier than England. It had potentially a stronger army and navy, but it didn't want to be world policeman at that time, because England was the world policeman, and whenever there's an outbreak of trouble, they would send in a battleship or two to calm the waters, so to speak. And then the First World War came along, and that changed the rules forever. Great empires collapsed. The Ottoman Empire collapsed. The Russian Empire, the Tsar, collapsed at the end of that war. And the new modern influences on the world emerged, which was America, of course, and Germany also retaliated from the First World War. So that's going to dictate the activities in Europe thereafter. World War II was a sort of knock-on, if you like, from World War I. England was completely devastated by World War II. It was broke. It relied entirely on American generosity. England had been the only one left fighting the Germans in the Second World War, and they were just about expired in terms of energy and money, and the United States came into the war just in the nick of time and supported England with money and troops, of course, and also ships. And so when England came out of the Second World War, it was just a pale shadow of what it had been over the last 60 years. And it had decided that no longer was it going to be the world's policeman. That job was handed over to the United States. Reluctantly on both sides. The last twitch of the lion's tail was the Suez Crisis in the 50s, where England and France still thought they had a colonial power and could control Egypt, and America said, no, those days of you invading foreign countries for your own financial benefit are over, and America then called the tune in terms of world police. And so it was that the empire broke up, and instead of just collapsing into individual countries like South Africa and Australia, New Zealand and Canada, they formed a club called the Commonwealth, and that still goes on to this day. So you have this sort of anachronistic arrangement today where the Queen of England, Elizabeth II, is also the Queen of Canada and Australia and New Zealand and a host of other little countries all around the world, out of their choice. And it's a matter of time whether Australia decides to go totally Republican, New Zealand likewise, and Canada, but so far it's lasted for the best part of 50 years.
Interesting.
And we'll end up with what England has done, good and bad, for the world, and let people make their own mind up.
Well, your grasp of the facts of history is totally amazing, and we appreciate so much how you share it with us in a way that makes it fun.
Thank you, Terry. I love it.
Hope you are there for session 5 and the culmination of this wonderful walk through history with Professor Adrian Kerr.